Yo, yo, how is it going? My name is Kahvan. This is SOFA SENSEI'S on the akhi&saltfish digital network. You're joined by me, Kahvan, and unfortunately Rachel can't be here with us today, but don't worry, we had a crazy weekend of fights. A Nigerian nightmare for many Nigerians across the world. And the new Leon Edwards becomes the UFC undisputed welterweight champion of the world. And still, Usyk still is the unified heavyweight champion of the world, defeating Anthony Joshua by split decision. I didn't mention how Leon Edwards won. We're holding that for later. If you know, you know. It was vicious. It was spectacular. MVP lost his bare knuckle fighting championship debut against Mike Perry on a points decision. Lots of controversy surrounding that. Oi, listen, it was a mad weekend. I'm still tired. I'm still collecting my thoughts. I'm still trying to catch up on some rest that I completely missed. But let's get straight into it. We are the SOFA Senseis. We are the couch coaches. We are the armchair experts. This is the akhi&saltfish digital network. Let's get stuck in. So, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to approach this in chronological order. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about the undercard of any of these events, purely because I didn't watch many of the undercards, and they won't live up to the hype of the main events, right? So I will touch on some of the UFC events, but other than that, we're not going to touch on the undercard. Right, so chronological order. The first thing that happened in this weekend of combat sports, it is August 20th, and right now it is 7:36 p.m. Look, you're seeing probably a very close-up video of me right now. We're still working on getting the videos where we want it to be, but I hope you appreciate the fact that we did do a video anyway. So yeah, enjoy. Right. MVP versus Mike Perry, a fight that came out of nowhere, a fight that nobody demanded, nobody expected, but as soon as it was announced, it was something that we couldn't get enough of. I was incredibly intrigued. I was very interested to see how MVP would fare in bare knuckle. Mike Perry has made a bit of a name for himself, obviously in the UFC, being a wild man, outside of the cage as well, a wild man. But also, in terms of bare knuckle FC, he beat Julian Lane, you know, the "let me bang, bro" guy from Tough. So he beat him. He's beaten a couple of other people as well, I think. He's done good, right, in his bare knuckle career. So putting him against MVP, it's almost like Eubank versus Ben. MVP should win because he's got cleaner striking and, you know, he's a striking expert. But there is that grit, that determination, that toughness of Mike Perry. The reason I liken that to Eubank Ben is because Eubank should win because of the size difference. However, there are a lot of intangibles like what the weight's going to do and also how hard Conor Ben really hits and if that translates up the weight. That's the comparison. Bit of a tenuous one, but a comparison nonetheless. Look, Mike Perry dropped my MVP in round 1. Yeah. And although by the end of the 5 rounds, a lot of people had MVP up 4-1, and therefore there was no need for a sudden death round, which Mike Perry won and therefore won the fight. That's probably an entertainment value factor in all of that. You know, the promotion probably spent a lot of money on getting MVP over, and likewise, you know, paying Mike Perry as well. So for them to get an extra round out of the 2 fighters, okay, it's a worthwhile cause for them financially. So yeah. By all accounts, MVP was robbed on the cards, even as the home fighter. But of course, he's not the home fighter in terms of bare knuckle FC because he's still signed to Bellator. This was just a one-off event for him. In terms of what happens next for both fighters, I'm a little, you know, concerned about MVP's career. You know, he's 35 now, I think. Definitely creeping up there anyway, and he's probably not going to be a Bellator champion. It doesn't look like he's going to sign for the UFC anytime soon. He is making, you know, taking these big fights for money, but it's not like he's on a crazy win streak either. This fight he had last night was the most damage I've ever seen him take in a battle. He looks like a completely different guy as a result of that damage. I think he's a little bit lost in terms of his career. Like I don't know if he's got that clarity on what it is he wants to achieve, or maybe it is just money, and that's okay. But yeah, a little bit disappointing. Although I think he won the fight, the whole journey of all this, and again, although interesting and intriguing, it's a little bit concerning as well because what are you really doing, MVP? You know, that's what's going through my head right now in terms of that. So we've got that. Okay, we'll move on. Nothing really else to say about that. I mean, I wish both guys the best. Maybe a rematch could happen in Bellator. That'd be interesting. To see MVP in a skill set that more supports him and his skill set and his repertoire. But that being said, Mike Perry in MMA isn't a pushover either. So you don't want to lose twice to a guy in two different sports. That's incredibly embarrassing. We'll talk about losing twice to a guy later on in the show, but yeah, lots to ponder on for MVP. I think I'm not entirely sure where he goes from here. He's lost twice in his hometown now. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, we'll move on. Obviously, after that, in terms of chronological order, it was the big show, right? It was the. Let me do that sound again. AJ versus Usyk. So in terms of the undercard, I'm trying to think of anything that stands out to me on that one. We've got Callum Smith knocking out his opponent in 4 rounds. That therefore means he's now the WBC mandatory for the light heavyweight championship. He looks huge as a light heavyweight. I don't know why he didn't do it earlier, or he was actually asked why he didn't do it earlier, and the answer was Canelo. Lots of money obviously on the table when you fight Canelo. Payday. So for instance, the next fight for Callum Smith seems to be Arthur Beterbiev versus Callum Smith. Obviously, Beterbiev already has to fight Yard, and he's now injured, so that's been delayed. It's meant to happen in October. It looks like it's going to happen early next year. So it's going to be waiting a little bit of time. The domestic scene at 175 is amazing, so there's plenty of domestic fights and domestic rivalries to be ignited there. I don't know if it's just me, and maybe it's just not on my radar, but he doesn't strike me as a name in terms of the domestic scene. He's obviously probably the most successful one in the domestic scene because he's a former world champion. I think former unified world champion at 168. So, there is that. But in terms of, bums on seats or striking interest, that being said, 2 performances at 175 have been exciting knockouts. So maybe that will build over time. But in terms of me and my interest, Callum Smith isn't that guy. But yeah, interesting to see how his career goes. I'm trying to think anything else on the AJ undercard. You obviously had Hrgović versus Zhang Zheli. Very interesting. Zhang, clearly old, first of all, but tough, durable, punches seemingly hard. Filip Hrgović, his dad did die recently. So maybe that explains a bit of a lackluster performance on his behalf. Not an amazing fight. Both look beatable by the next level above, and the level above I would say is probably the Joe Joyces. Then you've got the AJs, the Furies, etc., and the Usyks. That's the level above as well, right? So yeah, interesting. In terms of that fight in particular, one thing I noticed as I was watching that was the canvas and how wet it was getting and how slippy it was getting, and the implications that would have for the next fight in AJ and Usyk. But we're not here to talk about Filip Hrgović and Zhang Zheli, so we'll move on from that. We're here to talk about the Nigerian Nightmare Part 1 of the night for Anthony Joshua, the redemption fight, shall we say. Let's get into it. What was the narrative going into this fight? The narrative going into this fight was AJ has to win for the sake of his career. Usyk is going through a war right now in Ukraine, so he's fighting for a deeper motivation within this fight. In order for AJ to win, he has to rough up Usyk. He has to beat him up. He has to impose his size and really, really rough him up. There was speculation that Usyk put on about 15 kg in the lead up to this fight. That proved to be not true. There was speculation that AJ was slimming down in the lead up for this fight. That again proved to be not true. He actually gained 4 pounds in the process of training for this fight. Negligible amount in terms of heavyweights and the proportion of their weights overall. How did the fight play out? The fight played out like a new and improved version of the first fight, really. AJ was better. He was more aggressive in spots. Usyk was up for it though. And I think that was a big part of this fight, and it's part of the last fight as well. Usyk was up for it. He wasn't going to be bullied. He didn't want to be bullied. He knew when to move around, but he also knew when to just have a scrap as well and throw a few shots, and not just a few shots, but multiple shots, volumes of shots to ping AJ a few times. I didn't like, while I was watching this fight, AJ's reaction to being pinged. He always, when he did get buzzed on a few occasions, he just looked to stand still. Frustrating at times, but ultimately, I don't think AJ should be disappointed. He was better than his last fight. It's probably one of the best AJs we've seen, obviously, other than being purely destructive against lower level fighters. He did compete. He won on one of the cards, probably not on my card, but he did win on one of the cards. And he is fighting a pound for pound number 1, number 2, top 3 at least. And he come up short twice. That's okay. But that's okay for me as a SOFA sensei. That's okay for me as a member of the public. That's okay for me as a man who has an identity detached from boxing. When your identity is being Anthony Joshua, heavyweight champion of the world, and now you're no longer Anthony Joshua, heavyweight champion of the world, you're Anthony Joshua contender, heavyweight contender, former 2-time heavyweight champion of the world. What does that do to your psyche? What does that do to your ego? What does that do to your perception of self, particularly when you've just invested a hell of a lot of time, money, and effort into a camp? Look, the cracks were showing anyway. We knew he was under a lot of pressure from the Loughborough incident with the students, from the multiple interviews with IFL, the contradictory messages that he was giving off. AJ, as a man, has carried British boxing for at least the last 10 years. At least. He was the great British hope in terms of heavyweight boxing and boxing in general. There's many boxers over the last 10 years, particularly over the last 5 years, who have earned career high paydays as a direct result of AJ's involvement in the sport of boxing in Britain. Stadium after stadium after stadium after stadium. He deserves our respect at the end of the day. And I see a lot of people judging him and saying disparaging comments after his outburst at the end of the fight, which was incredibly odd, definitely. He gets the result. Then you see him shouting and getting aggressive at someone in the ring. Then you see him throwing the belts down and saying, is this what it's about? Then you see him walking off, which seems like he's going to stop and have leave. Sore losers kind of vibes. Then he turns around, he comes back in the ring, he grabs the mic and he goes on a long, long monologue about a bunch of different things. Rocky Marciano being 14 stone and I'm a big 18 stone man. He goes on about Ukraine. I don't really know what's going on there, but it's not nice. He goes on about, what else is he going about? Hip hip hooray 5 times, incredibly random. Champ, 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 champ. Odd stuff from AJ, but lest we forget, yeah? Concussion. AJ just spent 12 rounds being pinged left, right, and centre by pound for pound number 1. Accurate puncher. Powerful puncher as well. Underrated puncher. AJ's chin looked good, by the way. I thought his chin looked really good, actually. But, your brain don't survive that sort of damage and not live to tell the tale sort of thing, right? So all those weird outbursts that people are criticising, they're a result of being hit in your head. I'm sure of it. And, of course, being emotionally broken from putting your heart and soul into a camp, which led again to the same result as last time. He had to cut ties with Robert McCracken. What did that do to him as a man? A man that has nurtured him and seen him grow. He had to let go of him for what he thought was, a victory in the end. And actually, it was the same result. What does that do? What level of pressure is that? You see it as AJ's walking into the ring. You've got a bunch of people, hanging on to him as he's walking in. Those people are all paid by AJ. Every single one of them. If AJ loses and his money goes down, their money goes down. He internalizes that pressure. He sees himself as a provider for his community. And by community, I mean, local internal networks. But that's a huge network. So yeah, I understand the emotional outbreak. I understand the mental breakdown. And ultimately, I wish AJ well, and I hope he's all right. He's done a lot in his career. He'd be absolutely fine in terms of, look at me, I'm tired. I've got CTE, mate, I'm tired. He'd be absolutely fine if he retired financially. I don't know if he'd be satisfied as a man, though, and as a boxer, as a competitor, as a sportsman, if he was to retire today. There's so many big fights out there for him. He says he wants to be active. Dylan White wants to fight in November. AJ wants to fight in November. Eddie Hearn wants them to fight in December. I don't see any reason why that fight isn't the next fight for them both. I think it's a definite winnable fight for AJ. And if Dylan White wins, he's back on the world stage. If he loses, he gets paid handsomely. Who gives a shit? Can AJ become a heavyweight champion of the world again? I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters. I mean, he's 32 years old. Chances are we hopefully see the undisputed fight next year between Usyk and Fury. Fury or Usyk wins that. Might be a rematch, might be a trilogy. Who knows? Who gives a shit again? I think they both then retire after the result of that, adventure between the two of them. That opens up the division again. Even if they don't retire, the chances of them consolidating all the belts and keeping them there is very slim. Ask Josh Taylor, who in his last fight was the undisputed champion. He is now only the WBO champion. He's lost all those belts in the process of mandatories being called, etc. So, do you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot that goes into the future of the heavyweight division. So AJ could feasibly become a heavyweight champion of the world again. Might not be a pretty route, though. Talking of becoming a heavyweight champion of the world again, Deontay Wilder announced his return to the ring October 15th. We had about a 50-50 split on the SOFA Sensei'S Instagram page. And by the way, if you do want to follow the SOFA Sensei'S on Instagram, we are at SOFA Sensei'S. On Twitter, we are at akhi&saltfish. This is, of course, the akhi&saltfish digital network. And you can get in touch with us at akhi&saltfish@gmail.com. And please do send us your questions and leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really does help us out. So Wilder's coming back against Helenius, and I think it's a winnable fight for Wilder, but it is definitely a risk as well, because Helenius is on a really good run at the moment. Beat Kawanaki back-to-back, a prospect from Poland, I think. So if Wilder loses that, it's game over. He's retiring. That's fair. If he wins, though, you've now got the winner of Luis Ortiz versus Andy Ruiz, whoever that is. You've also got the AJ fight, and I think that's a really, really interesting fight. Probably wouldn't advise AJ to take it personally, because I think it's a fight AJ will probably lose and take damage in the process as well. And I think we're starting to see cracks in AJ, and being punched in the head when you've got emotional cracks forming just isn't a good combination generally, particularly by punching that hard in Wilder. So I mean, what can I say? AJ, people were being harsh on him. I got a few messages saying that was embarrassing. He let himself down. He got beat by the better man. I don't see the problem with that. I do not see the problem with him losing to the better man. Usyk is that good. It's not about how bad AJ is. Let's flip the conversation and say how good Usyk is. That's what this fight's about. Even when he was hurt, he didn't even look hurt, but he was definitely hurt in the process. Some of the body shots definitely hurt him, but he didn't look it in his face. That's why Usyk is so good. He knows when to move. What's that? Is there a song something like, you got to know when to hold him, know when to fold him, whatever. That's a country song, I think. But Usyk knows when to hold. He knows when to press. He knows when to create space. He knows when to close the space off. He's that good. AJ has been boxing since 18. Usyk has had a stupid amount of amateur fights. He's just too good. For now, anyway. And he is getting older. So at some point, all that experience is going to take its toll on his body. Right, so that's Usyk, AJ out the way, and obviously AJ's outburst was what it was. Again, I think as a network, we wish AJ the best, because he is a man where I'm concerned. There are some incredible memes, by the way. Yeah, and maybe we'll share some on the SOFA Sensei story, so make sure you follow us again. But overall, our concern is with AJ, I think. Although Rochelle wouldn't agree with me. I think he's a little bit more harsh on AJ and his performance, shall we say. And maybe he can come back and talk to us about it. It'll be fun. What else happened then? So then you got the UFC. So it's worth setting the scene as well. Just to give you an idea of how big of a star AJ is. I was at a party yesterday, a friend's party, and during the whole undercard, pretty much everyone's in the garden doing what they're doing, whatever. As AJ is walking in now, we're seeing the whole party migrate into the living room where the fight was on. Shout out to Dom, by the way, for buying the pay-per-view. Really appreciate that, because at $26.95, that's no easy feat. But that's how big of a star AJ is. We're talking 3-4 generations in the room watching this fight go down. you know, a lot of people not necessarily technically invested in boxing, but they're invested in the sports star, the man, the icon that is Anthony Joshua. So I don't say that as a AJ fanboy. I say that as a observation. So we owe a lot to him as British boxing fans, and ultimately, I think we've still got a few more years left in AJ, just not as a champion. And I think people need to accept that as much as AJ needs to accept that. It's okay if he's not a champion. Look at Derek Chisora, for instance, a well-beloved British fighter, but 12 losses on his record. So, you know, it is what it is. Right, moving on. UFC 278. So I was out at this party until about 2 a.m. in the morning. So I got home, fell asleep, and just woke up naturally at about 5:20. So I just caught the end of the Luke Rockhold versus Paulo Costa fight, which I will talk about because it was a back and forth war. If I'm honest, I completely resigned Luke Rockhold to getting knocked out in round 1 and 2. Did not expect it to go to the distance whatsoever. Didn't think Luke Rockhold would even be competitive. Didn't think it would be interesting. I just thought it would be the end of Luke Rockhold. You know, he's shown himself to be a little bit chinny in his last few fights. He was going against the UFC in the lead up to this fight. I thought his head was in the wrong place. I thought he was distracted, and I thought he'd be drained by the time the fight came around. I was wrong. He was definitely tired in the fight. He was tired after the first round. I think that has more to do with Salt Lake City being at altitude rather than any of the stuff I mentioned previously. I do think Luke Rockhold, he's now retired apparently. It was a great way to go out for him. Again, from my perspective, looking at the things that I look at for these fights, I think he took more damage than I would like him to have taken. That being said, he showed his toughness, he showed his determination, he showed his grit, and as a fan, as a viewer, it almost made you like him a little bit more. Luke Rockhold's a really difficult character to like. You can laugh at him, but to actually like him, he's a bit of a weirdo. But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He's a fighter at the end of the day. He's not going to be completely normal. But this was a great showing for him. I think his nose was broken or injured at least in the first round. And just since then, he was just, you know, like I said, he was blowing after the first round. But since then, he just stuck it on Paulo, you know, stayed in there. You know, obviously Paulo is an aggressive, explosive fighter, but he doesn't punch as hard as he looks. That's evident from the fact that Luke Rockhold stayed in there for 3 rounds. On the ground, Luke was more sloppy than you'd expect him to be, but he was still able to keep Paulo on his toes, and that meant the fight would go on longer than perhaps otherwise. In terms of on the feet, Luke had moments and spots. Paulo was certainly the winner in those exchanges, generally speaking, but Luke's kicks are still phenomenal. They're still fast. They're still accurate. They're still, you know, explosive. So that's still a selling point for Luke Rockhold. He is 37. I did think in this fight in particular, he looked really skinny. You know, in the lead up, in after the weight cut, even in the cage, on the octagon, he looked really, really skinny from my perspective. So that's probably a sign that his body's done. Like, he's been doing this for years. He was the Strikeforce champion, the UFC champion. He beat Chris Weidman, who would just beat Anderson Silva back to back. And when I say beat Chris Weidman, he decimated him. So he's had a great career. Obviously, he's on a bit of been on a bit of a skid ever since he met Left Hook Larry in Michael Bisping. But that being said, what a great career! What a great man. He seemed very bitter and troubled over the last few months in terms of the UFC and the treatment, and also, you know, life in general. So we wish him the best in terms of his well-being. But what a career! Wrap it up now. Be happy. He did acknowledge the fact that he's fucking old in his interview with Joe Rogan. So at the end of the day, every dog has its day, and Father Time is undefeated. So good luck to Luke Rockhold. Fantastic fight. Paulo Costa probably has to reevaluate his ambitions in the division. I think looking at who's above him and also who's around him in the division, I don't think he beats people like Izzy. I don't think he beats people like Pereira. I don't think he beats Whitaker or even Jared Cannonier. So that's fine. That's not a problem. But he's got a cult following now. He's quite a funny character. He can make a lot of money being just that guy. So yeah, best of luck to him. The main event. Oi, listen. The main event. Let me get a bit of water before I start talking about this main event. Yeah. Leon Edwards, a Brit, a Jamaican-born British man, fighting for the UFC undisputed welterweight championship of the world. Against the one and only Nigerian nightmare, KAMARU Usman, the pound-for-pound #1 fighter. in the world, and on the verge of tying Anderson Silva's unbeaten streak in the UFC with 15 victories in a row at this point, and Anderson Silva on 16. How do I say this? Round 1 was a fantastic round, really, really interesting round. I was just about waking up when I was watching this. So obviously Usman does what he's doing. He's pressuring him. He's got a really snappy jab, really powerful jab. He's imposing as a character in the octagon because he's not afraid of being taken down, and he's very confident in his own skills at being able to take you down. In the process of imposing himself on Leon Edwards, he does get a connection on Edwards in terms of getting his hands around him. But Leon Edwards reverses that and he takes down KAMARU Usman. He is now the first man in UFC history to take down KAMARU Usman. Previously, KAMARU Usman obviously had a 100% takedown record, defense record, and Leon Edwards broke that. So that in and of itself, at the end of the round, means one, because of what he did in the round, Leon Edwards won the round, but he also snatched that accolade from KAMARU Usman. Fantastic. And you could see Usman smirking at the end. And as I seen him smirk at the end, like, that's that, all right, shit, sort of smirk. Like, I can turn it on now. Maybe I was a little bit lazy in the first round. I'll turn it on now. And that's exactly what he did for the next few rounds. So round 2, Usman round. Okay, dominating, powerful, strong, volume. Leon Edwards is getting slightly tired. Again, we're talking about altitude here. He has acclimatized for the last 2 weeks, but Usman trains in Colorado, which is already an altitude high zone. So, or high altitude, yeah, whatever. Tired. So yeah, Usman's engine is always incredible. And to be honest with you, I'm a little bit suspicious of his engine. Some people call Usman the CEO of EPO. I'll leave it there. I won't say too much, but yeah. He's just dominating him. He's putting it on him. And you can see round by round by round, strike by strike by strike, takedown by takedown by takedown, clinch by clinch by clinch, where Usman is generally getting the better of Edwards. You can see, in my opinion, the life, the heart, the will to win drain out of Leon Edwards, which is incredibly disappointing. As a fan, one as a Brit and as a Jamaican as well, watching this, incredibly disappointing, man. And I'm thinking, this is your opportunity. You're on a 10-fight win streak. You're going to let that go down the pan. But also, because you're not a character, no disrespect to Leon, but because you're not a character, because you're not chatting shit, because you're not, people aren't gravitating towards you, you're not going to get this chance again. They're just going to say, you had your chance and you blew it, and they're going to fuck you off. So what are you doing? And, in that same tone as well was his corner, shouting at him, come on, Leon, you can fucking do it. Shouting in his face, right? And this doesn't seem to be going through. Round 3 and 4, he's getting taken down with ease. And it's incredibly frustrating watching this. Round 5, so in between round 4 and round 5, his corner really go off on him. So shout out to his head coach. He really goes off on him. And I was even sitting there thinking, I wouldn't like someone to talk to me like that. But stop sitting there feeling fucking sorry for yourself. And he's like, I'm not. And I think Dean Thomas made a good observation in the corner. He was saying, you always know when a fighter's mentally beat when he doesn't look his cornerman in the eye. Maybe that was Daniel Cormier, one of the two. And he didn't look him in the eye. And that was quite interesting to observe as well. And again, it was just frustrating to think that he's throwing away his opportunity after being so good and being so vocal in a lot of ways for this title shot, to then throw it away, in essence, through lack of heart, lack of motivation, lack of grit, was disappointing. And you could just see the confidence in Usman oozing. The Nigerian nightmare sticking it on Leon Edwards. But then, with less than a minute to go in the 5th round, the unfucking thinkable happens. KAMARU Usman is on the receiving end of a left high kick clean to the dome. He drops like a sack of potatoes. He stares bleakly at the lights. Out at this point. Out. Completely out. Breathing like that, right? That's when you know he's out as well, right? This is the cover for this show as well, for this episode. And what the fuck? You know when it's like 6 in the morning, half 6, I don't know what time it was, but I get my phone out right away, start chatting shit to the camera now, making sure everyone knows SOFA SENSEI'S is watching this fight, because that's really important to us. But What happened, man? Leon Edwards landed a perfect left high kick clean on Usman's tough head. And that was never in the realms of possibility for me. Never. I never thought Edwards was going to knock out Usman. I thought Usman was too tough, too hard. Never seen him rocked other than that Gilbert Burns right hand in round 1, which then Usman swiftly rectified. So I just couldn't see a circumstance whereby Leon Edwards would win in such a violent fashion. I thought if he was going to win, it was going to be by being a slightly technical, better, more proficient fighter. And that ship had sailed by about round 3-4. So I just didn't see, and the commentary said the same thing. It was basically saying he seemed satisfied with making it to the end and losing on points rather than being knocked out, which I agreed with. Then he landed his Hail Mary. No, let me not call it a Hail Mary shot, because it was calculated. He did throw a feint. He did set it up. He tried it before. It didn't work. He tried it again. It did work. He did knock out the pound for pound #1 best fighter in the UFC, the welterweight undisputed champion, KAMARU, the Nightmare, the Nigerian Nightmare, Usman. He did that. And a lot of his post-fight speech was, "Look at me now. Look at me now. You all doubted me." Poor accent, isn't it? But yeah. You all doubted me. Da, 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 da. He needs to get better at speaking, man. He was a little bit boring, I'm not going to lie. But it was great to see, despite all of that. I'm being critical, but it was great to see him win. And, if you think about who else has won the championship from Britain, I realise, because of the angle, my hands look massive. Bisping. Look what winning the championship done to Bisping's career. He became a loved character, and I really do hope that's what Leon becomes. Rochelle and I, we went to Birmingham O2 to see Bisping's Tales in the Octagon or whatever, something like that. Show, one-man show, really good show. And obviously the reception from the crowd for Bisping was huge. But the reception for Mark Goddard, the referee, was bigger for him than it was for Leon Edwards, an active UFC fighter on the verge of a UFC title shot in his hometown. So that was quite sad to see. Like the crowd just weren't really there for him, and I think he needs to do a lot more. Or maybe he doesn't. Maybe this is proof that you can just be yourself and be your complete authentic self and still get to where you want to be by virtue of hard work. And maybe that's the angle he takes. I understand that. But in order to get in, get rich, get out, you sort of need to capture the imagination of the people. And I hope and you know what, if I'm being honest, I hope he does it authentically. But equally, I hope he just does it, mate. That might involve slapping up Jorge Masvidal, calling him out, making that a big show, punching him up, rematching Usman, which I think is an inevitability anyway. I don't think they're going to let Edwards defend against anyone else but Usman first. I think he might beat Usman as well. Earlier in the week, we shared on the SOFA SENSEI'S Instagram page a clip of Edwards hitting some pads, vicious elbows, vicious kick, speed, power, explosivity, aggression. And I had a feeling that Usman was going to have a nightmare, pun included. And I was right, obviously, but, as I was watching the fight, I thought I was completely wrong. And the reason being, watching Usman beat Woodley was really interesting because Woodley was just that little bit too old and that little bit too distracted. Do you know what I mean? And Usman was creeping up. He is 35 years old, so he's, his body's already breaking down as well. Broke his hand in his last fight, has destroyed knees, doesn't run, barely works his legs, which makes you question his cardio. What else was I going to say? He is in the next Black Panther movie. He just got a chain with the NFT of him knocking out Jorge Masvidal. Again, believe in his own gas, believe in his own hype. That's fine. Confidence is definitely necessary in this sport. Ask Anthony Joshua. Perhaps not the most confident of people, and we're seeing what that leads to at this level. But with Usman, I still thought he had the fundamental skills, technique, and will to win that Woodley just sort of lost towards the end of his career. I'm not questioning any of that with Usman. He got caught with a shot that was fantastically timed, fantastically set up, and fantastically executed. That's fine. But what does that do to the man who was previously never barely even rocked to now being completely out of it? And by the way, when he did come back round, he was not in the room. What does that do to the man in his next fight against the same guy? The first guy to take you down, the first guy to knock you out. What does that do to your mind? Also, physically and neurologically, where are you at? Can you take a shot again? Sometimes once the chin is cracked, it's cracked for good. Sometimes it's not. Ask Luke Rockhold. So, you know, it was a fantastic evening of these amazing fights with amazing outcomes and you know, in a lot of ways, unexpected outcomes. I think I expected AJ to lose. I didn't expect him to have the outburst that he did. That was completely, you know, unexpected. I expected MVP to win, and in a lot of people's eyes he did. I didn't expect him to get dropped in the first round, and I didn't expect him to look the way he did at the end. I wanted Leon Edwards to win, and I had a weird feeling he would, but I didn't genuinely believe he would. And I think at some points in the fight, I don't know if he believed he would. And maybe I'm wrong, but he did in the end. And that makes him the second British UFC champion ever, but also the first one from Britain to train for the camp in Britain. So fantastic moment as well. In terms of anything else adjacent to the fight world, let's see. Make sure my ID is not on show. Let's see what else is going on, right? So, Tony Ferguson is announced to be fighting Li Jingliang September 10th at 170, which is amazing. So that means now Tony's allowed to put some weight on, and we can see what he looks like. So when he won tough, and when Tony Ferguson won the Ultimate Fighter, he stopped all of his opponents by some way, shape or form, and he was at 170. And I think, you know, recently, like Luke Rockhold, Tony Ferguson's been looking very skinny, and I hope those extra 15 pounds allow him to execute fights the way that he wants to, and preserve his chin for a little bit longer as well, which, you know, obviously was notorious for being tough and then cracked by Michael Chandler. Usman's face staring at the lights is haunting. Back to boxing. Usyk is a road warrior. If we go back over his last few fights, he's beaten Anthony Joshua in Saudi. He's beaten Anthony Joshua in the UK. He has beaten Derek Chisora in the UK. Beaten Tony Bellew in the UK. Beaten Murat Gassiev in Russia. Beaten Marius Bradis in Latvia. Beaten Marco Huck in Germany. Beaten Michael Hunter in America. And beaten Krzysztof Glowacki in Poland. That's everyone's hometown or home country other than AJ in Saudi. And that's his last run of fights. The guy's a phenomenon, and we should value him a lot more than we do. I think the language barrier is a huge problem for Usyk and his relatability for the rest of the public. Obviously, he is fighting a war, so in terms of conquering that language barrier, he's got bigger fish to fry. But an amazing night, an amazing, amazing night. I hope that satisfies your need for a review from us. I mean, I don't know if we went into enough detail in terms of AJ's outburst. He said some weird things, you know, what the fuck do the belts mean? And I sort of agree with him, to be honest with you. The belts don't really mean anything. They cost a lot of money. But it is nice to have an undisputed champion every now and then. He said things to Usyk like, how could you beat me? And, you know, I was determined. I'm powerful. I'm strong. You beat me because of skill. And people took that the wrong way. They thought AJ was saying, how could you beat me? But he's actually saying, in a compliment, you beat me because of your skill, despite me being the superior athlete, which I suppose is a backhanded compliment at best, but AJ meant well. And again, he was concussed, I'd imagine. It's interesting, though, seeing people turn on AJ. I don't really like that. Britain's a fickle place, and boxing is a fickle sport. People turn on him very quickly. What can you say? He's less than 1% of the population in terms of what he's achieved, but also in terms of the mentality you have to get in there and do what they do. So we're not always going to understand them, and I think that's acceptable. He cried at the post-fight press conference. Again, that's a big concern of mine. AJ previously in his last 2 losses hasn't really showed too much emotion, and then to cry at this one, it epitomises the level of pressure that he's under. So I just hope he's okay in dealing with that. I suppose it humanises him a little bit. But yeah, he's clearly under pressure. Fury, we didn't mention Fury, but Fury did a few posts about coming out of retirement. I could beat both Dosses in the same day. Shut up. Let's just, bro, shut up, yeah? Every time he talks, it's boring, man. Like, bro, you always come back and chat the most shit. I'm retired, I'm not retired. Arthur Derek Chisora 2 million. I'm retired, now he's a Dosser. bro, just do what you got to do and shut your mouth. Like, you could have just stayed quiet between April and now and said you want to fight Usyk. That's the normal path, right? Then you said you want 500 million to come out of retirement. Then you said you'll fight AJ if it's only free for everyone. You're like, shut up, man. Really annoying. But what a fantastic fight him and Usyk would be. We'll get into that nearer the time if it does ever get announced. Talking to Fury, chatting shit. Tommy Fury came out talking nonsense about, Jake Paul, let's get this fight on. Bro, please conduct your fights and conduct your business in private. Because as, what's that guy's name? Stephen A. Smith. As Stephen A. Smith said, I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care. Yeah? 2 fumbles you've made in terms of that fight. So just do it privately and let us know when the fight's on and we'll watch it. Because we will watch it. It's going to be a fascinating fight if it ever happens. But until then, shut the fuck up. Please. Respectfully. And I think that's it, you know. We've done what we had to do today. I've been Kahvan. This has been the SOFA Senseis. It's been a Nigerian nightmare for KAMARU Usman and Anthony Joshua. Even MVP has had a nightmare this weekend. Lots of questions about where they all go next. I think we see the rematch between Leon Edwards. I think we see the rematch between Leon Edwards and KAMARU Usman. I think we see MVP and Mike Perry in the octagon or the Bellator cage. And I think we see AJ Dylan White rematch. So trio of rematches in multiple sports, multiple organisations. Exciting times ahead, possibly by the end of the year. The next big fight is September 10th with the UFC card. I can't remember what it is. Obviously got that Tony Ferguson fight we mentioned and a few other exciting fights. I think Zhang Weili's on there, I think. I'll have to look into it. But we'll catch you then. And of course, if anything else happens in the fight world, you can count on us. The couch coaches, the armchair experts, and most importantly, the SOFA Senseis. I've been Kahvan. This is the akhi&saltfish digital network. If you're interested in any of our content, we have this show. We also have Before Our Friends Die, and our latest episode is on house renovations. And we also have Cool, Fine, Done, Wicked on the fantastic Before Our Friends Die theme song, and we break that down. It's all about music in Cool, Fine, Done, Wicked. So if you enjoy music, check that out. If you enjoy combat sports, stay right here on SOFA Senseis. And if you enjoy random things about life, get into Before Our Friends Die. We've got something for you, I'm absolutely sure. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, and leave us a 5-star rating review on any of your podcast platforms. We really appreciate it. That's it. Take care, have a great evening, and good night.